In this video, we're looking at the most dangerous teens ever sentenced to life in prison and their chilling reactions when they realize they'd likely never walk free again. Some dangerous teen unalivers were as young as 13 at the time. Here's how the most dangerous teens reacted to their life sentences. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate became the youngest American ever to receive a life sentence. He was only 12 at the time when he unalived 6-year-old Tiffany Unick. Lionel's mother had been tasked with babysitting her niece, Tiffany, that evening. She left the two kids downstairs to play and watch television while she worked upstairs. A few minutes later, Lionel came rushing upstairs, claiming that Tiffany was not breathing. Emergency dispatchers were immediately called, and they were shocked at Tiffany's condition. She had suffered multiple wounds, and experts claimed that it almost seemed like she had been rammed by a car repeatedly. Lionel later confessed that the two were play wrestling while watching WrestleMania on television, and he was just practicing moves on her. Defense argued that he had no intention on unaliving his cousin, but prosecution claimed that Lionel showcased a sort of violence that was typically seen in adult, repeat offenders. The judge was shocked at the prosecution's evidence against Lionel and recommended the maximum sentence, a lifetime in lockup. However, the prosecution then joined the defense in trying to overturn Lionel's lifetime conviction. This was a controversial move, and the judge claimed that the prosecution should not have charged him with unaliving in the first place. In any case, Lionel was released in 2004 for a year's house arrest. Unfortunately, this was not the last time he would be locked up. In 2005, while still a teen, Lionel was arrested yet again for violating his probation. He had reportedly threatened a pizza delivery driver with a weapon. Lionel was rearrested and this time sentenced to 40 years in prison. Paul Gingerich. Paul Gingerich was just 12 years old when he became involved in one of the most shocking juvenile cases in Indiana's history. In April 2010, he and a 15-year-old friend, Colt Lundy, plotted to unalive Colt's stepfather, Philip Danner, in the quiet town of Cromwell. The plan was driven by Colt's desire to escape his home and a bizarre scheme the boys discussed of stealing Danner's car and heading off to a new life. On the day of the crime, Colt obtained guns from inside his house and signaled Paul and another boy to join him. Paul went into the home through a window and, acting on Colt's cue, fired 2 shots at Danner. The 50-year-old man was hit multiple times and passed away in his living room. Moments later, the boys took his vehicle and attempted to flee, eventually being stopped by police hundreds of miles away. Because Indiana law at the time allowed even very young children to be tried as adults, Paul was charged and initially sentenced in adult. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit unaliving and received a 30-year prison sentence. David Brom. David Brom was a 16-year-old from Rochester, Minnesota, whose name became permanently linked to one of the most brutal family unaliving in the state's history. In February 1988, Brom carried out a violent attack inside his own home that left his entire family unalived. At the time, David lived with his parents, Bernard and Paulette Brom, and his younger siblings, 13-year-old Diane and 11-year-old Ricky. By most accounts, the family appeared stable from the outside, but tensions had reportedly been building between David and his parents. He had been in trouble at school, and disagreements at home had escalated in the weeks leading up to the killings. Late one night, after the rest of the household had gone to sleep, David armed himself with an axe. Moving through the house room by room, he attacked each member of his family. His parents and siblings were unalived in their beds, in what investigators later described as an extremely violent and deliberate act. The next day, he went to school as if nothing had happened. When police discovered the bodies and began investigating, attention quickly turned to David. He was arrested shortly afterward and charged with 4 counts of first-degree unaliving. During the trial, prosecutors argued that the killings were premeditated and carried out with clear intent. The defense focused on David's mental state and suggested he was suffering from severe psychological issues at the time. Despite these arguments, a jury found him guilty on all counts. David was ultimately sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences in prison. Mason Sisk. In 2019, Mason Sisk, who was regarded by friends and family members as a quiet, nerdy kid, shot and unalived his entire family. Mason was from the small town of Elkmont in Alabama, home to just about 5 to 100 residents. Everyone knew each other, and they knew the Sisk family, parents John and Mary, and the 4 kids, Mason, Grayson, Aurora, and Carlson. Mason was John's kid from a previous marriage, and his biological mother had passed away when he was 3 years old. Friends and family claimed that Mary had raised Mason since the age of 4 and treated him as her own, referring to herself as a mother of 4. At the time of the unaliving, Grayson was 6. Aurora was 4, and Carlson was only 6 months old. Investigators were called to the residence in 2019 by Mason, who claimed that he was playing video games in the basement when he heard gunshots. He claimed he rushed upstairs and witnessed a vehicle speeding away, and his entire family was shot. By the time investigators arrived, everyone in the house had been unalived, except Mason, who miraculously survived. They started questioning him immediately, and it was not long before he confessed. While there have been different theories over what could have led to Mason's snapping, he claimed that it was because his parents had fought a lot and he wanted out. His caseworker commented that Mason showed no remorse and did not ask about his family even once during the entire trial period. His lack of empathy for his family members and for the people he hurt was something that struck a nerve with the judge. Mason reacted calmly and showed no emotion when he was sentenced to a life behind bars in 2022. Raymond Childs. At just 17 years old, Raymond Childs committed one of the most horrific crimes ever recorded in Indianapolis's history. He was responsible for the mass unaliving of 6 people, including an unborn child, and received a life sentence for each crime, coming up to 3 to 160 years in prison. At 3 in the morning, on January 24th in 2021, police arrived at an Indianapolis home where neighbors claimed they had heard gunshots. Police arrived to find a 15-year-old lying outside on the porch, bleeding. They transported him to the hospital, where he claimed that his older brother, Raymond, had shot at their entire family. Police then found the bodies of Raymond's father, stepmother, siblings, and one of the siblings' pregnant girlfriend at the home, each having been shot multiple times. The 15-year-old survived the incident and claimed that Raymond had gotten into an argument with their father over violating his curfew and taking the family vehicle without permission. Later that night, he retrieved his father's gun and shot at the entire family. Raymond was apprehended within a few hours at a relative's house and calmly admitted to the mass unaliving. The child's family had been revered in the local community, especially Raymond's father, who was a youth mentor and had supported many local communities. The judge noted the ruthlessness of Raymond's crimes and did not buy the defense's argument that he was not acting like himself at the time of the unaliving. Nathaniel Brazil. In 2000, Nathaniel Brazil shot and unalived his school teacher, Barry Grunow. Nathaniel came from a broken household, and police noted a lot of violence surrounding him as he grew up. Still, he was described as a mild-mannered and overall well-liked student by his teachers. Nathaniel himself claimed that Barry was his favorite teacher. However, on the last day of the school year, 13-year-old Nathaniel was reprimanded by Barry for throwing water balloons and sent home early. Nathaniel then went home, retrieved a weapon, returned to school, and shot his teacher in the head, immediately unaliving him. He was then seen waving the gun around and threatening to shoot other teachers at the school as well. The prosecution wanted to charge Nathaniel with manslaughter, but reached a plea deal with the defense and agreed on a near-life term. Since 2000, Nathaniel has been incarcerated and will likely spend the next 30 years of his life, practically all of his life, while locked up. Carly Gregg. 14-year-old Carly Gregg had been a handful for her mother, Ashley, and stepfather, Heath Smiley. Reports showed that Carly had been on medication, was known for being reckless at school, and had been consuming large amounts of illegal substances. However, on March 19, 2024, things seemed relatively normal. That was also, unfortunately, the day that she decided to unalive her mother. Ashley had been a mathematics teacher at Northwest Rankin High School, where Carly studied. They came home together that evening, put their things aside, and went about their day. Investigators later claimed that Carly went into her parents' bedroom, retrieved their gun, and then shot her mother. She then texted Heath from her mother's phone, pretending to be her, and asking him to come home early. Heath claimed that Carly ambushed him when he came home, shooting aimlessly and even hitting him close to the neck before he managed to get the gun off her. Carly then ran outside of the home with a friend she had called earlier. Heath phoned the police immediately after finding his unalived wife. Carly was arrested almost immediately and confessed to everything. In court, prosecutors played CCTV footage from within the home, which showed Carly entering her parents' bedroom and then emerging with something hidden behind her back. It then showed her entering another room where screams could be heard. She then exited that room with the same item concealed behind her back and then texted Heath from the kitchen. Carly sobbed in court as evidence of her mother's unaliving was played out, including the 911 call made by Heath, where he was audibly heartbroken. She apologized in court, and her defense team claimed that Carly suffered from mental illness and would never have done something like this if she were properly medicated. The judge, however, rejected the defense and called Carly a monster. In the end, at just 14 years old, Carly Gregg was sentenced to life in prison. Cameron Herron. In 2018, 18-year-old Cameron Herron was racing against 17-year-old John Barinauer when Cameron noticed Jessica and Lilia Raubenolt attempting to cross the pedestrian ramp. Cameron was driving at 100 miles an hour, and the black box from his Mustang showed that the vehicle speed had come up to 30 miles per hour at the time of the crash, showing a hard brake. Witnesses claimed that they had noticed the cars racing all throughout the Bayshore Boulevard, with some even contacting the police about it. Jessia was a 24-year-old mother who came to South Tampa with her 21-month-old daughter to visit family. Jessica passed away at the scene, and Lilia passed away from her injuries at the hospital later that day. Cameron had a long history of reckless driving, which was noted by the prosecution. The judge agreed that this was a case of gross neglect and vehicular manslaughter, sentencing Cameron to almost 30 years behind bars. What was particularly ironic about this case, though, was the tremendous amount of online support Cameron received. Courtroom footage went viral online, with many coming to Cameron's defense, mostly because of his good looks. Many commented that Cameron was too cute for prison. His TikTok profile, despite not having any videos, now has over 2 million followers. Even Cameron's mother commented that netizens had an almost unhealthy obsession with her son. Mahek Bukhari. Known online as Maybe, Mahek Bukhari was a British-Pakistani social media influencer who had over 200,000 followers on TikTok and 50,000 followers on Instagram. Her content mostly focused on lifestyle, beauty, and daily vlogging with her mother, Ansreen Bukhari. She had even won an award for the Best Social Media Star at the 2019 BritAsia TV Music Awards. Mahek was from an affluent family, living in Leicestershire in the United Kingdom, and was known online for having a close, tight-knit relationship with her family. However, she gained attention in 2022 for causing the unaliving of 2 men, Saqib Hussain and Hashim Ijazuddin. What followed was an even more shocking revelation. Ansreen had been in a 3-year relationship with Saqib, who was 18 at the time the relationship began, 30 years younger than Ansreen. After the relationship ended, he began blackmailing her for money. Mahek, having learned the situation, tried to intervene and allegedly planned on harming Saqib to keep him quiet about the situation. In 2022, Saqib and Hashim were ambushed by Mahek and her friends at a Tesco parking lot, where they arrived after Ansreen had lured them there with the promise of paying Saqib £3,000. A high-speed chase ensued in which Saqib and Hashim's car was pushed off the road, crashing into a central reservation, catching fire, and unaliving the two instantly. The trial was highly publicized. There were people who sympathized with Mahek's position, and her defense team argued that she was under severe stress because of Saqib's blackmailing, which would have led to her parents' divorce. The court did, though, try Ansreen in a separate case, stating that she was equally responsible for what Mahek did. She cried repeatedly throughout the 10-week trial and was a mess when the judge sentenced her to serve a life term. However, in 2025, she successfully appealed her case and received a reduced sentence of 27 years. In any case, she will not be eligible for parole until 2050. Willard Miller. The small community of Fairfield was left shocked after investigators found the body of local Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, disposed of near the rail tracks. Nohema had gone to the park earlier that day on her usual walk, but never returned. Investigators found her badly beaten, and later determined baseball bats were used in her unaliving. What followed was a shocking revelation. 2 of her students, Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, both 16 at the time, had ambushed her in the park and unalived her. Why? Because Willard claimed that he had received a bad grade in his Spanish test from Nohema and had asked her repeatedly to improve his grade so he could apply to better colleges. Nohema refused, and he plotted with Jeremy to unalive her. The teen's defense claimed that he had only wanted to scare Nohema, but things escalated, and neither planned on actually causing her unaliving. In court, Willard tearfully read a letter to Nohema's friends and family members, claiming that things got out of hand, and he was not acting like himself that evening. Nohema's family, however, was unmoved and asked that the judge see through his act. The judge did, and claimed that had it not been for his age, he would have sentenced him to a life term without parole. Currently, Jeremy's serving a 25 years to life sentence, and Willard is in prison for 35 years to life. Jake Evans. On October 6, 2012, a 911 operator listened calmly as 17-year-old Jake Evans recounted unaliving his mother and 15-year-old sister. Jake had just shot and unalived both his mother and sister in their family home, later calling 911 and staying on the line for 20 minutes to recount the entire incident. When asked what had motivated him to commit the act, he claimed that it was not anything specific. He said that he did not like people arguing, and that his mother and sister had been arguing earlier that day. Jake then went on to state that he was not a bad person and that this was very unlike him. Even community members agreed. They claimed that Jake was an overall good kid who would stay out of trouble. At the time of the incident, the father was away on a business trip. In a 4-page confession, Jake claimed that he had watched the horror remake, Halloween, about 3 times that week. He claimed that he was amazed at how easy it was for the unaliver in the movie to commit his crimes. He later wondered if it would be just as easy for him. Jake also claimed that he had initially planned on using a knife, but then decided to get through the deed as quickly as possible. The weapon was a .22 caliber he had stolen from his grandfather. The defense argued that Jake was a well-liked kid who was suffering from a mental breakdown at the time of the crime, but the prosecution pointed out that his sister was shot twice after Jake realized she had somehow survived the first shot. They also pointed out that after realizing one shot might not have been enough, Jake went back into the study and shot his already unalived mother in the head. The judge was sympathetic to Jake's mental condition, but also noted that he was a danger to society. In the end, Jake Evans was sentenced to a lifetime behind bars. Joshua Phillips. Melissa Phillips entered her 14-year-old son's room and found a horrific sight. Underneath Joshua Phillips' bed was the body of 8-year-old Maddie Clifton, a neighbor's daughter who had been reported missing just a week prior. Melissa phoned the authorities immediately, who then apprehended Joshua at school. When he saw police approaching him, Joshua immediately confessed, but claimed that he did not commit the crime because he was a bad person. Instead, he claimed that on November 3rd, the 2 kids were playing when he accidentally hit Maddie. Fearful that his strict father would beat him for it, Joshua claimed that he acted on impulse and tried to unalive Maddie. This was what his defense argued in court, too. Joshua was distraught throughout the trial, repeatedly apologizing for what he had done, but claiming that he was not thinking straight. However, the prosecution argued that Joshua could have done anything besides unaliving an 8-year-old girl, or in any case could have told anyone in the week that she was hidden under his bed. Investigators also pointed out that Maddie was still alive when Joshua went back home the first time after strangling her, but that he stabbed her regardless. He even took part in search and rescue efforts to find her, sentencing him to serve out a life term. Seth Gonzalez. The Gonzalez family had relocated to Australia from the Philippines after the 1990 Luzon earthquake and completely rebuilt their life from scratch. Teddy Gonzalez was a respected lawyer in the community, and his wife, Loiva, and 2 kids, Seth and Claudine, were equally beloved in the Australian Filipino community. However, the community was left in shock after Seth unalived his entire family in 2001. According to investigators, Seth planned the unaliving after his family had threatened to disinherit him. He had dropped out of school, was rebellious, and had a girlfriend the family disapproved of. In 2001, he finally snapped and unalived his family members one by one as they returned to their Sydney home with a baseball bat and a kitchen knife. By 7 in the evening that day, Seth had unalived his entire family. He then went over to a friend's home by 8, spending the evening with him, even eating pizza and playing video games until close to midnight, before eventually being dropped off at home. Then, he played the scene, claiming he had just arrived home to find his entire family unalived. Seth even spray-painted racist slogans on the walls to make it look like a hate crime. However, investigators could see through his lies almost instantly. For starters, Seth was emotionally distant in the days after his family had just passed away, even acting odd at their funeral. He also visited the family accountant to transfer everything in his name, moved into an apartment in an affluent area, and put down a down payment on a Lexus. Police arrested him a few days after the crime, and prosecutors charged him almost immediately. In court, he continued to maintain his innocence, but a psychological evaluation showed that Seth was a pathological liar. They also found the same spray paint on his shoes as was used to write those racist slogans. While Seth pleaded that he was innocent, the judge sentenced him to serve out 3 life terms. each one of the unalivings he had committed.